Chapter 27 is slightly different in its tone from all the previous chapters in this book. And the reason for that is that the kind of offerings being spoken of in this final chapter are not obligatory but are voluntary. So the people who make these kinds of promises are people who choose to do so. Now, there are reasons why somebody might freely choose to make one of these voluntary vows, to declare something to be devoted to God, and we'll come to those reasons in just a moment. For now though, it's important that we understand nobody is required to make these vows, but if you make them, you must keep them. God expects you to be a person of your word. So then, two reasons why you might make a vow like this. Either out of elation on the one hand, or perhaps out of desperation on the other hand. Probably many of us have done this. So, imagine you've just landed a new job and it's your dream job. It's everything you would want it to be, and yes, it's even a step up in pay from your previous job. And then maybe in your excitement, you would say something like this: God, I'm so grateful. And well, you know that I haven't been giving to church, not as I should be. And that is part of my spiritual worship. I've been neglecting it, but it's only because I couldn't really afford it, Lord. Now that I can afford it, now I'll be a generous person because I'm just so grateful, God. And then when that paycheck arrives and the opportunity presents itself for you to keep your vow, your promise to God, well, suddenly you are reminded of all the other important things that you just need to spend that money on right now. And so you think to yourself, well, I will be generous, but next month. Well, hang on a second, God says. You made a vow. You keep your vow. You make that your priority. On the other end of the scale, and perhaps more commonly, sometimes we find ourselves in a bad situation and we say to God, look, if you do this thing for me, then I will do that thing for you. I haven't revised for my exams, but God, if you give me good results anyway, then I will give you anything. I will give you service in the tabernacle. The equivalent might be I'll volunteer in Sunday school, or I'll sign up for the music group. If you just come through for me here, God, I'll dedicate this aspect of my life to you. I promise. Now, in Moses' day, what sort of things would people vow to give to God in these free will offerings? Well, the first section is all about vowing people. So I'll give myself to the service of the Lord. I'll go and work in the tabernacle. I'll help with the sacrifices or carry the firewood, or I'll repair things if they break. This is a vow of devoting yourself to the service of the Lord. Do you remember the story of Samuel? Well, his mother, Hannah, she was unable to have children, and so she made a vow. Do you remember? God, if you give me a child, I will dedicate that child to your service. I will give him back to you. And God did. He blessed her with a child, Samuel. And Hannah, to her credit, she fulfilled her vow. She brought him to the tabernacle to live a life of service to God. Now, you might also vow to give an animal in verse 9, or you might vow to dedicate your house in verse 14, or you might vow to give your land in verse 16. So those four categories of offering: people, animals, houses, and land. What then about this talk of buying it back, redeeming someone in verses 1 to 8? And, moreover, isn't it sexist that women appear to be less valuable than men, according to this chapter? Is that what it's saying? The idea, of course, is that if you decide to vow yourself to the service of God, but then you change your mind, well, it wouldn't be right for you just to abandon your promises. That would be disgraceful. But God, in his kindness, in his grace, allows for people to be redeemed from their vow, bought back from their promise. So the money then that is spoken of in this chapter, it does not speak to the value of that person, but simply to the amount of physical work they would likely be able to accomplish. Very few people had office jobs back then, you realize that? Very few people worked in insurance in ancient Israel. So the question is not who is more intelligent or even who is more valuable, but simply who is more likely to be able to do more physical labor. So if you are depriving the tabernacle of someone who could do a lot of physical work, you ought to compensate the tabernacle more because of it. So in actual fact, this verse is simply recognizing that men and women are made different, and in most cases, a man would be able to do more physical labor than a woman of the same age and stage of life. So therefore, it should cost less to redeem a woman from her vow, less money to give her her freedom again. Now, all of this, in the entire chapter, we see that it's God's gracious concession because he knows we are weak. He makes allowances for us. But listen, the God we serve, he's so powerful and so wonderful that he's never, not even once, had to make a promise and then pull back from it. The wonderful story of the Bible is the story of a God who always keeps his promises, no matter what it costs him. Yes, he is faithful even though we fail. He is sinless even when we sin. And when he says that he will make a way for God to dwell among his people, well, you better believe he means every word he says. No matter the cost, he will keep his promise. Because of that fact, one day you and I will dwell in his presence for all eternity. And that is the book of Leviticus.